So welcome to the On the Blue Line podcast with Wayne Mulder. I am your host, Wayne Mulder, and this is Morning Roll Call. I'm excited to be back with you guys again this week. I hope you enjoy this episode. I cannot believe that it is almost the end of August. This month is flying by, which means on September 1st, the new interview room is going to be here, and I hope that you enjoy it. I sit down with Scott Edwards. It's a great time. He's a very funny guy. He's just a lot of fun to talk to, and of course he had spent years around comedians, so telling some of those stories, it was just a blast. So you are going to enjoy this Thursday at 0500. The interview room is officially back, and the next 7 or 8 episodes are already recorded and ready to go, and I tell you, the lineup is going to be fabulous. So definitely this Thursday, 5 o'clock, make sure you check that out, and in the coming weeks. But let's get started on today's Morning Roll Call. All right, what I want to do is I want to start with 3 stories that matter to you, or 3 stories that might matter to you. I'm going to start with a little bit of a good news type story. This is brought to us by Blaze Media, and it looks like Chris Pendoffel did this article. Pretty much, Washington State Sheriff's deputies say a mass shooting was thwarted at a festival that they were having. So Washington State authorities said that a potential mass shooting was thwarted last Friday night after citizens at a music festival saw a suspicious man and reported him. I would say it was quite suspicious because when they said they saw the guy, he was inhaling an unknown substance or gas from a balloon. Okay, kind of different. And then loading 2 9mm pistols from the trunk of his car. The 31-year-old was later identified as Jonathan R. Moody, and they saw him conceal one of the pistols in the rear of his waistband and another in the outside the waistband holster. And then he decides to approach some concert goers and began asking them what time the concert would end and where are people going to be exiting from. Seems kind of suspicious to me. So law enforcement is called. They get out there. They end up arresting him. 1 count of possession of a dangerous weapon, 1 count of unlawful carrying of the handling of a weapon. And of course, law enforcement said that it wasn't the weapons. Even though you're not allowed to have weapons on site, that was clearly not the lone factor in the arrest. It was the appearing to inhale an intoxicant, loading the weapons, the odd questions, and the further suspicions from witnesses and deputies. Of course, Mr. Moody did not make any statements to deputies. But the festival organizers made a statement after the arrest saying, "Safety is our top priority. Thank you to the fans who reported him and the venue. Security and Sheriff's Department for handling the situation. Always look out for each other. Stay safe, yada, yada, and yada." However, remember last week we talked about this, that you, not law enforcement, are the first responder. And here you go again. Long before law enforcement could even get there, long before a tragic incident may have occurred, you, the people, were able to see something that looks suspicious. And yes, there is the whole see something, say something, but sometimes it's see something and take action. But in this case, the actions and the statements and the contacting law enforcement that these people did possibly saved some lives. So great job to them. All right, story number 2. The evidence shows, this is an opinion piece, and I'm getting ready to quote the evidence shows, but this is an opinion piece out of Newsweek magazine, written by Jeffrey H. Anderson. He's a president at the American Main Street Initiative, and he was the director of Bureau of Justice Statistics at the DOJ from 2017 to 2021. I would say that that's somebody who probably understands justice statistics. Just guessing. Seems to make sense to me, right? So the title of this opinion piece is, "The Evidence Shows George Soros is Wrong on Crime." I don't even know that I need a lot of evidence to know that to be factually true, because he's wrong on just about everything and he's a horrible person. But that's neither here nor there. So George Soros recently had an article where he spoke in the Wall Street Journal in an op-ed that, quote, "Black people in the U.S. are 5 times as likely to be sent to jail as white people," end quote, and that this is, quote, "an injustice that undermines our democracy," end quote. Let me start with, we're not a democracy. We use a democratic process, but we are a republic, not a democracy. But now that I got that out of my system, let me go on. So the writer is pointing out the error in what George Soros is saying. Now he does, what he's doing is he's taking a stat that we're going to get to it here in a minute, and he's pulling it and tweaking it and trying to fit a certain agenda, right? So the writer says, fortunately, statistics show that justice in America is far more colorblind than Mr. Soros is, which I think is a great sentence and a great statement. So he goes on and he said, for starters, Soros is wrong to say that black people are 5 times as likely as white people to be in jail. So the ratio in jails is 3.5 to 1, and it hasn't been 5 to 1 in 20 years. In fact, the jail incarceration rate for black residents was lower in 2018 than any time since 1990, and it fell another 21% as jail from 2018 to 2020 as jails were partially empty during the COVID pandemic. However, giving Mr. Soros the whole benefit of the doubt, if you would, maybe he meant the rate at which people are sent to prison and not jail. So the imprisonment rate for black residents was lower in 2019 than at any time in the last 30 years, and fell another 14% in 2020. Black residents are, however, about 5 times as likely as white residents per capita to be in prison. 5.1 times more likely, to be exact. But, there's always a but, right? So the BJS, National Crime Victimization Survey, which is the survey that essentially they ask the crime victims, not the police, who committed the crimes against them. So it isn't really, the demographics and all that information is coming from the victims themselves. So that's where this statistic is derived. And in a BJS report released last year, he found that among serious, non-fatal violent crimes that victims said they reported to police, 42.8% were committed by black offenders and 40.9% by white offenders. Here's the important part. Like, this is, if you're going to do statistics, if you're going to take numbers, if you're going to just throw them out in an article like George Soros did, it helps if you actually back it up with the total facts, right? Like, why would that be? So given that white people make up 60.4% of the population and black people 12.5% of the percent, that works out to black people having been 5.1 times as likely as white people to have committed these crimes, according to the victims. So the demographics of prisoners match the demographics of perpetrators, which is obviously just. Does that not make sense? Now, the reason they only go with the non-fatal violent crimes is because you will find that the victims of fatal crimes, say homicide, don't typically answer a lot of surveys. I mean, we send them out. We do, some people that are backed by George Soros may get them to vote, but that's a different conversation. However, it is difficult to get them to answer surveys. But who knows? Future is wide open. So it would be an injustice if some people were or weren't being prosecuted for crimes simply because of the color of their skin. No, really? Huh. In fact, that seems kind of not only unjust. So a similar injustice would be to refuse to prosecute whole classes of crimes because they are disproportionately committed by people of one skin color or another. But that is exactly, and I'm quoting here, what Soros-backed prosecutors do. In fact, this is exactly what Governor DeSantis was in the news for recently, trying to solve in the state of Florida, which is wonderful. So Soros goes on, and he is clearly, so he states, Soros does, in his original article in Wall Street Journal, that we need to protect people against violent crime, but not focus on other crimes. So in other words, he's against this whole broken windows theory, which has a history of working. In fact, such policing, and I'm quoting here, which succeeded spectacularly, speaking of broken windows policing, under New York Police Commissioner William Bratton, reduces crime, restores order, and revitalizes communities' quality of life. Soros' claim of injustice does not hold up to scrutiny, unless that is, one thinks that punishing individuals who commit crimes undermines our democracy. There is that word again that drives me absolutely crazy. And let me be clear, we use a democratic process, but we are not a democracy. So, in truth, our republic is undermined by lawlessness, including the scourge of selective prosecution. And then he ends with a quote by Abraham Lincoln, "Let reverence for the laws be taught, written, preached, proclaimed, and enforced in the courts of justice. And in short, let it become the political religion of the nation. So I think that's a great article. It really drives home what you're hearing in the news if you're following any of this with the Soros-backed prosecutors and the absolute disasters that they are creating in some parts of this country. And to that end, the third news story for this week that I want to bring to your attention, I actually first saw it. Blaze Media had put out an article where they referenced this, but then I went straight to the tweet from Smith & Wesson, and I want to read it to you. So this is a letter that Smith & Wesson's president, Mark Smith, had sent out. And I'm going to read a lot of it only because it's good. It really is good. And he really makes some points that actually relate to what I was just talking about. So he begins, a number of politicians and their lobbying partners in the media have recently sought to disparage Smith & Wesson. Some have had the audacity to suggest that after they have vilified, undermined, and defunded law enforcement for years, supported prosecutors who refuse to hold criminals accountable for their actions? Where did we just see that? Yeah. Overseeing the decay of our country's mental health infrastructure? Yeah. Check. And generally promoted a culture of lawlessness. Smith & Wesson and other firearm manufacturers are somehow responsible for the crime wave that has predictably resulted from these destructive policies. But they, referring to these politicians, are the ones to blame for the surge in violence and lawlessness, and they seek to avoid any responsibility for the crisis of violence. That's interesting. And you know what is worse, and he says this in the second paragraph, it's no surprise that cities suffering most from violent crime are the very same cities who have promoted this irresponsible soft-on-crime policies that often treat criminals as victims and victims as criminals. Many of these same cities also maintain the strictest gun laws in the nation. That's interesting. Yeah, but rather than confront the failure of their policy, certain politicians have sought more laws restricting the Second Amendment right of law-abiding citizens. And he goes on in the next paragraph, and I love this, to be clear. So he wants to be clear here, right? Like this is what I want you to understand. A Smith & Wesson firearm has never broken into a home. A Smith & Wesson firearm has never assaulted a woman out for a late-night run in the city. A Smith & Wesson firearm has never carjacked an unsuspecting driver stopped at a traffic light. Instead, Smith & Wesson provides these citizens with the means to protect themselves and their families. Yes, that is exactly the right way to talk about the Second Amendment. Because these firearms are not the problem. The people, the human heart, the sin, that is the problem. Mental health, like I talked about 2 weeks ago. Those are the problems. The gun, the firearm, doesn't do anything unless you touch it. I've been around guns for a long time, and I have yet to see them do any tricks. And it's really disappointing. I mean, you sit there and you stare at it, and you hope that it does something, like maybe it's going to jump, or I don't know. It doesn't do anything. It's boring. Just sits there. Yeah. It's like, sure would be nice if you would do something. Anyway, he goes on to talk about being proud of their 170-year history, their commitment, and ends with, we will continue to work alongside law enforcement, community leaders, and lawmakers who are genuinely interested in creating safe neighborhoods. We will engage those who genuinely seek productive discussions, not a means of scoring political points. And we will continue informing law-abiding citizens that they have a constitutionally protected right to defend themselves and their families and will never back down from their defense of the Second Amendment. Great article, great letter, and it will be in the show notes if you want to look at that and see a little bit more about it. So those are the 3 stories that I wanted you to catch for this week. Let me know if you like this new format. I'm going to do a 3-2-1. So for the 2, we are going to go over 2 crazy things that I want to share with you. And I thought for this week, the 2 things would be responses to TikTok videos that I had put out. So essentially, I'm going to tell you what the video was, and then I'm going to tell you one of the crazy responses that I received. But first, let me tell you, yes, it is true. We are on TikTok. In fact, I am on TikTok. And anyone that knows me personally is probably thinking, yeah, trust me, I'm with you. Besides the whole communist Chinese party part of TikTok, it's not really a world that I really care for. However, I will say that when it comes to engagement, I get a lot more engagement on TikTok than I do on any other social media platform, much faster. So I guess I'm going to stay on TikTok. And maybe there's a lesson in there, like I need more engagement on these other platforms. So for the time being, yes, you can find On the Blue Line podcast on TikTok. However, let me tell you, so I posted one of the videos, this was also out on Instagram and it was on Facebook, but the tagline was how law enforcement prepares you for success in life. So one of the responses I got, and by the way, I get crazy responses all the time. I just thought it would be good for you to get to see some of them. So this one, quote, like fascism in an unhealthy ideology of what an alpha actually is. So I'm thinking this genius is saying that that's what law enforcement prepares you to be, is a fascist and gives you an unhealthy ideology of an alpha? It's interesting. I could meet him somewhere on his whole fascism comment if we looked historically and we were talking, there is a conversation you could have there, because as I warn and talk about a lot on this show, is law enforcement is the most local version of the government that most people have access with. So you have to have a free and constitutional government in order to not go down that road. But other than that, yeah, whatever. So I placed another video on TikTok. Does society survive? Discussion about juveniles. So the tagline on it was, does society survive? And this was the video that was related to the podcast from, I think, 2 weeks ago, where I talked about the juveniles and the crazy things that have been going on, the ones that have been shooting out of the vehicles, the ones that have been screaming and cursing at cops in their diapers. I mean, just absolute foolishness, right? So the responses, I actually put 2 of them in here. Cops are getting their collective reward for enforcing the law instead of serving and protecting. Huh. I don't even know how to respond to that one. So in your world, enforcing the law is not serving and protecting? Enforcing the law is not what cops do? Protecting and serving can't be done through the enforcement of the law? Like, if it's an issue where you don't like a law, then you're coming to the wrong people, right? Nah, you don't come to the enforcement side, right? That'd be the legislation. And you get them to rewrite the law, and then they would enforce the new law, the one you're happy about. So I have no idea. But that one made me laugh a little bit when I read that one. And then the other response is, I get this type of response all the time on things I put out. So it was that same video, and they responded, cops did it to themselves. It won't stop until qualified immunity goes away. It's so frustrating, right? This is such a huge misunderstanding on what qualified immunity actually is. And to use that as a reason why it's okay for kids, like toddlers, to be shooting at cops or screaming and cursing at them, and this complete just absence of any morality, this absence of any authority, this just complete breakdown in the societal mores, and to say that, well, it's okay because of qualified immunity, is not only inept, it's kind of dangerous, actually, because it shows a misunderstanding that fuels a mindset that is exactly what's creating the danger that law enforcement is out there dealing with. So I wanted you to hear both of those. So the one important takeaway. So we had the 3 news stories. We had the 2 crazy things I wanted to tell you. And the last section is one important takeaway. So the important takeaway for this week is, we have a broken society. It's backwards, it's upside down, it's inside out. We call good evil, we call evil good. We have presidents who think they are kings. I mean, just this week we saw a president trying to, just last week, try to redistribute wealth at, something we have not seen at that scale, financial scale, with a president. Just amazing things. We have the breakdown of not breakdown, we have an attack on the middle class, on the freedoms in America. We have societal breakdown, as you're seeing in these chats and in the videos that we're putting out. You've got, you don't know what truth is. You hear this, you hear that, and you have no idea what is even real anymore. If you're like me, you've got rising costs that have become crazy. Your housing costs have gone up. Your costs, I mean, just my electric bill this last month, I was looking at trying to figure out how we ended up $60 over. And at some point in the last year, I haven't pinpointed the exact month, they added a charge that if you are in the area, you're paying as well for pretty much a green energy transfer. So for something that is more destructive on the planet and isn't going to work and is horrible technology, you're now paying more for it. So all these things, right? And the stress and the pressure and all this, and I get it. For some people, the answer is you want to go bury your head in the sand, right? You don't want to see it and you don't want it to impact your world and your life. And I get that. But what I want to assure you of, and the one takeaway, the one thing I want to give you this week is that you, the individual, are the answer. Last week, I talked about how you, not law enforcement, not the police, are the first responder. And that is very true. But I know I'm also talking to a lot of first responders. So this one applies to everybody. You, the individual, are the answer. Let me say that one more time. You, the individual, are the answer. All of these societal problems. Now, there is an argument that you could make that if we continue to go down some of these roads and we don't make some abrupt changes, that where we're going to end up is going to limit individuals' power. But for now, we're going to talk as though the Constitution is still somewhat being adhered to somewhere, even though not in Washington, D.C., as we saw last week. So if you are the answer, what does that mean? So there has been, if you look at the collective attacks, and that's what I call them. Obviously, there may be people with differing opinions, and you know what? You're fine to have your opinion. However, there's not a lot of leeway on anything tied to the Constitution. But we have this huge push by people, by elites, towards collectivism, towards globalism. It's not the individual, it's the group. In fact, it's all about dividing everybody into groups, like the second article I read where we talked about race. That's this whole idea when we come to critical race theory, all these things, and it doesn't matter which one we're talking about. There are tons of them out there. The idea is to separate everybody into groups. No one's an individual. It's no longer the content of the character. It's literally the color of their skin that they care about. And that's just one arena. Whether it's money, no matter what arena it is, the attack is on the individual because they don't want individuals. All of these things are to move away from individualism, to move away from the power that you and I have as citizens of this great country. So what I really want to encourage you this week is to not forget that and then to start to take action. The temptation is we're exhausted after working these long shifts, and maybe you've got other projects going on, and you're just tired, like I am right now recording this at this hour of night. It's like 8 o'clock, and I've had 2 interviews today for the podcast, and then I'm putting this together for Monday. And it's been a long day, and I'm tired, but we all get tired. We have to keep focused on what's important. There was a lot of hope this last week in the state of Florida where we started seeing some of these school boards flip. The reason that happened is because people got local and remembered that they are individuals with power. And they banded together because that's the thing. Once you're empowered as an individual, then you can band together as a group. But you're a group of individuals, not a group that some other person, some elite, some government entity has compartmentalized you into. Rather, you are using your strength to go out, use your voice to stand up for what you know is right and to regain this country. I've had a lot of great conversations lately. Today I had one with Molly DeFrank. She's going to be on a future podcast here in a few weeks. And in that episode, we're talking about detoxing digitally for the family. And one of the fundamental principles that we talk about is this idea of bringing the family back together, strengthening that nuclear family. Having the whole idea is not to get rid of something, but rather to fill that space, because that strength of family, that strength of community, and that power of individuality is where the power of this nation comes from. So as we go into this election season, this isn't really an election statement, but it's been heavy on my heart as we've gone through the primaries and then some of the absolute insanity that happened this week and we literally have a government that doesn't believe a constitution exists. And if they do believe it exists, they certainly do not believe they have to follow it. So it is up to you and me, the individuals in this country, to regain some semblance of what this country was meant to be. So I encourage you this week to remember your power. You, the individual, are the answer. All right, for this final section, I just want to leave you with a couple reviews. Thank you so much, those of you who take the time to review the podcast on whatever platform you are listening to it on. From Apple Podcast is obviously the best. So definitely, even if you've left stars or something somewhere else, please also, Apple Podcast is huge for us, but I want to read you a couple that have been left for us. This one is 5 stars. Yes, that is the correct number of stars. It says a must listen. So much great information. Don't pass this one up. Keep up the good work. And that's from Motor Chronicles podcast that had left that for us. Thank you very much. And our friends over there, if you haven't checked out the podcast where I got to be on their podcast, that was a great privilege as well. So check that out. You can go to the website ontheblueline.com and look up the podcast appearances under the Listen tab, and you will be able to hear that podcast, and it was a privilege to be able to be on there with them. And then this one that I want to leave you with was left in reference to the Father's Day episode I had, where I had the privilege of sitting down with my son. And again, 5 stars. That is the correct number. Thank you very much. And I thought your recent Father's Day episode was great. Your son brought some great insight for the children of Leos and for Leo families. Really good info. I bet it was fun to interview your son. And yes to TVRXRYDI. Yeah, I have no idea. But to whoever you are, yes, it was a lot of fun and it was a privilege and I enjoyed it. So thank you so much. If you leave us a rating and review, I will start reading them in the podcast. If you like this new format of the 3, 2, 1, please let me know. I'm going to be, it may even be dropping on the video below here. I'm going to be creating an email address specifically for feedback. So if I can get it done before this episode releases, then definitely send us an email. I would love to hear from you directly, hear what you have going on, and hear what you like about the show and what you like about the On the Blue Line. One more time to remind you, this Thursday, the interview room comes back. And for everything else that you may want to know about what's going on, it's On the Blue Line, ontheblueline.com. Thank you so much. Everyone have a great week out there. I will see you on Thursday in the interview room. And until then, I will see you out there on the Blue Line.